VikesNow, Dustin Baker. I'm here with Josh Frey on the September 21st edition. This is our burden. We have to do shows even after the losses, nauseating ones like the Eagles Vikings. How are you recovering? How was your week been?
Let me tell you, Dustin, I got an extra cup of coffee in me this morning. I'm a little fired up to talk some Vikings. Yeah, that was a bit of an
Man,
ass kicking on Monday night, huh? That one sucked.
yeah, I tried to when it was happening, and if you stick around long enough as a Viking fan, you know the feeling when things start to go to shit. And I knew it when Irv Smith dropped the sure touchdown. I was like, oh, well, you can put a nail in this baby because this is one of those nights. And I searched my memory bank and I tried to think, well, maybe that Christmas Day game against your Saints was the last time I can remember feeling this bad. But even then, their offense was good, decent in that game. So I think it was week 2 of 2020 when they lost to the Colts was the last, and coincidentally, week 2. So I don't know if there's bad Cousins mojo in week 2 or whatever the hell it is. That was the last time that I remembered this type of lifelessness.
Yeah, so honestly, for me, at this point, I'm annoyed that they lost that game. Like, there were so many chances for them to at least get back in this game. Like, you mentioned the Irv Smith drop, Justin Jefferson running the wrong route on that first interception. The Adam Thielen interception, I think Luke Braun did a great job of breaking it down on Twitter, where it's basically that's the right read. The cornerback just made an excellent read on the ball, and you just got to tip your hat at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And then a few miscues, like missing Jefferson on a wide open wheel route. Like there were so many chances to get back in this game, and they just flat out missed them.
And
So
that
I'm more annoyed than I am concerned.
and that was the weird part because my wife and son were watching the game with me. My daughter's still a little aloof on football, but we're watching it, and then the Irv drop happens, and I swear to God, I was like, well, that they won't win this game because that was a time when a haymaker was needed because the pace of the game was all right. These guys are going to go mano a mano, and that would have put them, I think, at 17-14, getting the ball back in the second half. But to your point, over and over again, I would nudge my wife and be like, well, God, I guess maybe this is different, especially after the Patrick Peterson block field goal, which was kind of our final hand coming out of the grave. And yeah, it was whether Cousins was responsible for the 2 picks or, the third one is obviously just a mini Hail Mary. It was like we were destined to have futility, even though the Lord was saying, come on back, baby. We know you're a good football team.
Yeah. If I'm being honest, like obviously this one stinks,
Mm-hmm.
but if you look at Super Bowl teams of the years past, like the Buccaneers, they got stomped week 1 against the Saints. They got stomped again by the Saints. They got stomped by the Bears. And then they basically going into December, they didn't lose another game for the rest of the year. They got their battles out of the way early, and then they didn't lose. Then the Rams last year, they're 7-4 through Thanksgiving. They lose 3 straight games in November.
Right after the Von Miller trade and I think addition of Odell.
Right, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they look like they're going to be a wild card team, but they're not gonna make crazy noise in the playoffs. And then they go on the run in December and January and win the Super Bowl. So
Yeah, I think the biggest problem for you and me and the rest of the Vikings community is after the relative domination of the Packers in week 1, it really felt like all of the positivity and the hopes that all this team needed was a different head coach were true. And then you went back to not even like the Zimmer style, like this Mike Tice style of defense, where now I'm still petrified. I'll be driving up to the game Sunday, and I hope there's a moment where I turn to the people around me and say, where was this defense on Monday? I pray that I get to use that sentence, that it shows up against Lions, because I don't want to be a part of a season where the defense is just utter garbage. I mean, that was from head to toe, even though they made some plays to get back in it. The porousness was unforgivable. Like every time he threw it, they ran it. It was like, well, let's see if they only get 12 yards this time.
yeah, no, the first half was utter garbage. I
Mm-hmm.
think with that, you just take the tape and you burn it, you throw it out, you don't even look at it. But that's interesting because the second half gave me some hope
It did. I,
because
I thought that they just played. I thought the Eagles played their version of Zimmer ball, where they were like, we don't really need to score. These guys aren't a threat. So maybe that was me being cynical. I had hope from the takeaways, like in like the moments of change that were like seeds that were planted. But I kind of felt like the Eagles were like, yeah, we're good. We don't need to do all the long shots. And I could be wrong, but
Yeah, and I mean, I could be wrong too. They could just be playing conservative football, but I have a tough time believing that Nick Sirianni going into the second half was like, "Hey, they've got Justin Jefferson, Kirk Cousins, Dalvin
mhm.
Cook on their side. We're up 17, we're fine."
Yeah.
I think he was like, "Hey, we need to keep our foot on the gas here because this team can score 17 points in the blink of an eye." And honestly, you mentioned the 2020 defense, especially against the Saints last year,
Mhm.
where they just rolled over. I think this is different because they shut him out in the second half. They didn't let him
Yeah.
cross midfield after that blocked field goal. Like this wasn't a bad performance in the second half. Like the first half was utter garbage, but I think there's some good takeaways from the second half here.
Yeah, I
I
think
think this is a different team.
all of my emotions were invested in the second half, and I checked out when Irv Smith dropped that. I just knew in my heart and bones that the game was over. So I think anything after that, I was like, oh, good for them type of thing. But to your point, the there is precedent for good football teams getting their asses shellacked. But this is what I'm super curious about now is because the Lions aren't the old Lions or the 2016 Browns. Their defense still sucks, but their offense looks pretty potent. So I think almost, I say this every week, it feels like we're going to know whether or not this is a good football team because if they lose to the Lions or it's like some 45-48 shootout, I'll start to teeter on like we can't take them seriously because right now I'm scarred from that first half. Like I don't know what to think. I still believe there's 11-6 team in there, in their bodies, but I'm nervous that God, if they're capable of looking like that, then maybe everything was just way too optimistic.
Maybe I do think the Lions are going to put up some points this week. I do think they're going to make us sweat a little bit going into that fourth quarter, but I have faith that especially this offense, this might be the first time where we come out of this game and we're like, yeah, that's why this team brought in Kevin O'Connell. Like we
Yes.
saw it in the first half against the Packers a little bit, but they basically ran vanilla offense throughout the entire second half, so it was easy to forget about how good that first half was.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that we're going to come out of this game being like, yeah, that's why we brought in Kevin O'Connell.
Yeah, it's his second big test because the first big test was obviously opening the building with the Packers in there and then getting their asses beat in Philadelphia. Should have been a test, but they didn't even show up, so they flunked. But now, with his, early coaching resume, he's got to bounce back because if it's a repeat or if it's just sloppy and they find a way to win, I guess we'd take it. But I'm at a crossroads in determining how I feel about forecasting the rest of the season. Of course, I'll love them to death, even if they finish 1-16 here. But I don't know. I truly believe, like with the roster, all the dudes I always rattle off, all 9 of them, however many they are. I swear to God, that has to be a good football team. Maybe not the deepest thing in the world, but I think there's a pathway to 10 or 11 wins based on the dudes that are on there. And on Cousins, we know this happens. This is the knock on him. He has a turd like this annually, usually maybe 1.5. And you wrote an article on Purple PTSD talking about how Matthew Stafford did the exact same thing in week 1. And it was like, oh, there's some rust there. Oh, poor guy. Something's wrong with the elbow. And with the Cousins, it's the every media outlet picking it up and saying, oh, 2-10 on Monday Night Football. And I'll search my brain for the rest of my life to figure out why there's two different dichotomies for both dudes, but elaborate a little bit more before we get into the Lions about why Stafford can have 1 touchdown, 3 picks in week 1. Cousins does the same thing in week 2, but for Stafford, it's like, oh, he'll get him next time, Tiger.
Well, I think first of all, for most of his career, he played in Detroit, so most of the games went under the radar when he did it there. And then coming out of this one, like you look at the scene, they're handing out Super Bowl rings, they're putting up banners. That's why he can get away with it in week 1. Like
Yeah.
we know that he's won a Super Bowl before, so I don't. Yeah, plus the elbow thing, like that's why I think he got away with it. If I think if Kirk Cousins comes out and he plays well for the rest of the year, which I do think that this team is still going to play well. Like they got their wounds out of the way early. That's a good thing. And I think they're going to come out better for it for the rest of the season. So
And
I think that they're going to be good.
And Cousins will. That's the thing. Like, I think there was so much hype and momentum that perhaps the dirty version of his reputation was over because his pal O'Connell is in town, and therefore he's not going to have the bad Kirk games. That simply wasn't true. That was a bad Kirk game. There is one per year. I don't care what you say. And when I say one per year, I'm talking about an absolute dud. There are other games, especially in December, where he's like, yeah, man, he just wasn't quite good enough. There are other subpar games. But one where it's absolute futility, where you start to agree with the Kirk naysayers for about a half hour during the game. You're like, God, maybe they're on to something. Those happen once per year, habitually, like clockwork. And for his sake, it sucks that it had to happen on Monday Night Football because the whole planet was watching.
Yeah, no, like there's one of these every year, but this isn't even a Kirk Cousins bad game. This is just a bad Vikings game. This is just a bad Vikings game overall. Like nobody showed up. Justin Jefferson was covered by Darius Slay perfectly for the entire game, and I feel like he kind of went into the second half and just I don't think he was trying all that hard in the second half. I'll just be honest. Like his head obviously wasn't in there, especially you're running wrong routes. Adam Thielen, he kind of showed up in the fourth quarter, but 0 targets for the first 3 quarters. Come on, man. You gotta at least get open a couple times here to give Kirk a window. And then Irv Smith. It's just a bad drop. Bad drop. Kill the vibe. And yeah, you just lose the game.
You stole my segue, which is a good thing, on Adam Thielen. So all the Vikings community, and then ESPN did their power rankings, and Kevin Seifert, or in the ESPN power rankings, they had one big adjustment each team should make. And from ESPN and Seifert, it was like they need to involve Adam Thielen more. So I want to ask you, I think that is a common mindset. Thielen said to reporters after the game, he needs to look in the mirror and figure out how to get open. I haven't figured out if this is his problem or the new offense is just not targeting him. But now that it's out in the open that the guy is under targeted and they only gave him targets during garbage time, do you see Thielen actually getting the ball against the Lions?
Let me make a prediction for you, Dustin.
All right.
2 touchdowns for Thielen on Sunday.
Okay. Wow.
He's gonna score twice. I think he bounces back. Dude's a veteran. He's been here before. He knows what he's doing. I trust him. I think he's done enough throughout his career to earn our trust.
So
at least for another week.
What's happened? In your opinion, is it that he has had a hard time getting open in a new offense, or is it the new offense hasn't showcased him?
I think week 1, you just didn't need him. Justin Jefferson was open every single time. You can feed him the ball. He's a lot more dynamic after the catch, I think. And if you can feed him the ball, you're going to get it to him. So I just don't think you needed him in week 1. It was unnecessary. And then week 2, I do think that Philly secondary got to him and Jefferson a little bit. And they shell shocked him at the beginning and they just never recovered from it. But I do think they're going to come out fine against the Lions. I'm not worried.
Okay. So what about Dalvin Cook? He has I patted him on the back multiple times at this time last week because he quietly had 108 yards from scrimmage, but it wasn't overly dynamic. It was just he got it done. Great. However, Kirk Cousins was the leading rusher against the Eagles. I don't know if that's the first time it's ever happened in his career, but I should probably do the diligence. And
I hope it is for his sake.
Yeah, they only ran the ball a handful of times, which usually is a blueprint for disaster. I know it's a cause and effect relationship. When you're winning, you start to run the ball more, yada, yada. But Dalvin Cook is paid very handsomely. And although it's not the Cook show anymore inside an O'Connell offense, what do they need to do to ensure that they don't have a repeat of the offensive nastiness with Cook?
Yeah, this is the one area of the offense that I am a little bit concerned about because you mentioned the 108 yards from scrimmage for him in week 1, 4.5 yards a carry. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But you look at week 2 against the Bears, the Packers allowed 8 yards a carry to David Montgomery, and he got whatever he wanted. So I do think I am a little bit worried about that. And then even the Eagles defense, they let the Lions run for 10 yards a carry on them. So obviously this Eagles defense isn't like through the roof against the run. Like they're not something that you can't run on. So I am a little bit worried about Cook. I kind of hope that they activate Ty Chandler this week. I want to see him get in this offense, maybe take a few snaps, run between the tackles a little bit. Because I do think I am a little bit worried that Cook might be losing a step.
Oh, really? Okay. I was going to ask you to clarify what you meant. But you mean at age, what is he about to turn 27? Yep.
Yeah.
God, that would be a little premature to be losing a step, especially for a dude who didn't play very much in 2018. However,
well, I mean, you look around the league, like even Derrick Henry, he's
Yeah.
not been good through these first 2 weeks. Aaron Jones he went off against the Bears, but it's the Bears. Week 1, he was basically a no show. So these guys, they're all hitting that point. I think where it's just they've got so many touches under their belt. And you mentioned Cook didn't play much in 2017, 2018, but that's because of injury.
Yeah,
So
yeah, really nasty injuries too.
yeah, yeah. So I do think that we're just getting to that time where these guys are going to start slowing down a little bit.
I guess I should have prefaced that not that it really matters that he didn't take a bunch of hits
Right.
but he yeah, to your point, like he took a big enough hit that sidelined him for most of those seasons. All right, so I also wouldn't put it past Cook, kind of like you're talking about Thielen, for him to show up in week 3 and have 3 touchdowns and 200 yards because I think he's capable of that. But the next month or so will be very telling about his career trajectory because if it's more of this blasé bullshit, then we have a very expensive running back who is just a run of the mill RB1, which feels very weird to say about Dalvin Cook.
Right.
All right, the Lions defensive EPA per play, third worst in the NFL. Yay that Aiden Hutchinson had 3 sacks. That doesn't mean everything. But to the Commanders and to the Eagles, they were able, or they allowed a lot of yards and a lot of points. Conversely, their offense, even without Jamison Williams, is fantastic. Deandre Swift is, we talked about perhaps Cook devolving. Well, Swift is evolving. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown, in my opinion, is about the 10th best wide receiver in football, like just out of nowhere last year. And Jared Goff doesn't look like a generalized moron like he did in the past 2 seasons or so. So break down this matchup, and we'll get to a prediction in a little bit, but tell me, do you have anxieties or do you think this will be a rebound game for the Vikings?
I don't necessarily have anxieties about this game. I do think it's funny because we all assumed that when they made that trade for Jared Goff, he was basically just a placeholder for the next guy. But you look at how the Lions are building this offense. It's very similar to how the Rams built it around him when he was there and going to Super Bowls. So they've got a great offensive line. They're dealing with some injuries right now, which should benefit the Vikings this week. But still one of the best tackle groups in the league. Running back Deandre Swift, just incredible, averaging 10 yards a carry through 2 weeks. Like, you can't ask better than that. Overall, they're averaging over 7 yards a carry. So that's what scares me most about this matchup. And then, yeah, Swift or Amon-Ra St. Brown. Yeah, like you said, I think he's the 10th best receiver right now, maybe even a little bit higher if you actually made me break down the rankings. But yeah, this offense is great. They're making Jared Goff a game manager. And when he can do that, he's really good. He's at least accurate as a passer, so he can do that. If you focus the offense too much around him, kind of goes into the toilet a little bit, like you saw with the Lions last year. But this will be a fun matchup. This is going to be, I think, a shootout. You air it out. And then, like I said, this is where you bring in Kevin O'Connell, and you're happy he's your head coach.
And you got Hawkinson in the middle, who is, relatively dependable. Oh, what was I had a follow up there, but I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. In the shootout realm, here was my follow up. Sorry, the Vikings rushing defense ranks 32nd per DVOA, and I know a lot of that was in week 1. I think they surrendered, rushing yards because they wanted to prevent the big play, and it seemed like that's what we've been talking about for 2 weeks now. Is what side of the ball they're going to stop, and it's like that pisses me off because I want them to be decent in both. I don't want to concede 6 yards a carry on the ground just to stop Jalen Hurts or vice versa. So I'm nervous that the conversation is like, what are we going to stop this week? Like, because for six years of the Zimmer era, I got used to being able to stop both sides. So when you say that you're concerned about the defense, is it secondary, the dudes up front, or both?
I think it's honestly the linebacker group more than anything. Like,
Okay.
Eric Kendricks and Jordan Hicks, they look decent in week 1, but last week was where you really started to see that, yeah, guys like Jalen Hurts, they're not going to be able to stop him, I don't think. At least not right now. And we talked about it earlier. That's a trend with Ed Donatel as a defensive coordinator too throughout his entire career. But I do think that this is still a work in progress. Like, obviously the Vikings aren't Super Bowl contenders after week 2. I don't think that anybody should have really expected them to be. But that doesn't mean they can't be 3 months from now. So this is still a work in progress. This isn't the finished product. They're going to be fine.
So before I get to your prediction, I want to understand this a little bit more. You have a defense that showcases Danielle Hunter, Zadarius Smith, Dalvin Tomlinson, Harrison Phillips, Eric Kendricks, Patrick Peterson, Cameron Dantzler, and Harrison Smith. Why are we talking about, well, maybe they'll be the 24th best in the league and that'll be enough. Why are we talking about futility as the ceiling for a team that has that many dudes? What am I missing?
Well, like I said, this is a brand new scheme. They are
Okay.
good guys. Patrick Peterson's definitely lost a step, though. I do
Yeah.
think we need to be a little bit worried about that. Eric Kendricks, Jordan Hicks, they're going to bounce back. Danielle Hunter, Zadarius Smith, they showed it in week 1 that they can rush the passer. They can get to the quarterback, and I think they'll be able to against Jared Goff, too, even though the Lions have a really good O-line. Honestly, Dalvin Tomlinson's probably been the best player on
Yeah.
this whole defense.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's been really good. I think you still need to get Harrison Phillips a little bit more involved in the running game. I think he can do that. We just haven't seen a ton of it yet. But like I said, this is a work in progress. We're still building to what this team can be. They're not there yet.
Okay. So, because when you rattle off that many dudes, there's no reason to pretend like this is a 2003 Vikings defense that is virtually anonymous, no names that was going to finish 30th worst in the league or worse. So I got a little paranoid there when you were talking about like, well, we know that they're not going to be this good, and I'm like, bullshit. They could be good. They just got to figure out like how to do it.
Right. Yeah, that's more my point. They're
Yeah,
not great right now, but I do think they can be. They
yeah.
they they can be.
It didn't help that I think by almost every credible account, the Eagles have the best offensive line in football.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just one of the
That
many
team,
things that's glorious about them.
yeah, that team's just really good. That team's really good. You got punched in the mouth on Monday. It's got to bounce back. Like that team's going to be there in January. So you
Yeah.
got to be ready for that.
All right. So I think later in the week, I'll have my storyline show solo, but I will. I'll do the spoiler now. I'm taking the Vikings 34-17 because indeed I see a bounce back game. I do believe the team is good. I do believe that defensive personnel is worth a damn, and you can stop the Lions. I don't care how many breakout guys they have. Give me your prediction and why, and then we'll get off air for the day.
So the Lions have shown that you have to score basically 40 points in order to beat them. So I do think the Vikings are going to win, and in doing so, I think they're going to win 42-31. I
Oh,
think the
wow.
Lions are
Yeah.
going to put up some points. I think it's going to be a relatively close game going into the fourth quarter. But if there's a game where Kirk Cousins throws for 5 touchdowns, Justin Jefferson goes for over 200 yards, it's going to be this game. It's going to be this game. This defense is terrible. They're gonna put up points on this defense. They're gonna be fine.
All right, 42-31. Another thing we're due for, which isn't really important in the grand scheme of things, is curiously, since the start of last year, the Vikings don't score rushing touchdowns.
They don't.
No,
It's weird.
they have none this year, none this last year. And I think if you polled like NFL executives, they would say that the Vikings have a top 3 or top 2 running back core, but they don't score rushing touchdowns anymore. So I think one of these games is going to be just this explosion, kind of like the Eagles in week 1, where 4 different dudes score rushing touchdowns. And maybe that's my little prediction that I've talked myself into here with Josh Frey on VikesNow. But they are really overdue, like mathematically, statistically for rushing touchdowns. It's very weird.
Yeah, I think that's more of a credit to just Adam Thielen and KJ Osborne being able to get open in the red zone. Like they're two
Yeah.
of the top guys in the red zone in the entire league. Like no matter who you ask, like this is a really good wide receiver core once you get down there, which makes it even weirder that they didn't score touchdowns last week.
Yeah, that was newfound doldrums because the Zimmer Vikings, no matter even if they weren't crazy explosive, they were always one of the best teams in the red zone with Kirk Cousins in the saddle. So when they got down there 3 or 4 times and couldn't do dick, it was like this is really, really weird. But to your point, you said it about 5 minutes ago. You hired Kevin O'Connell to figure these problems out, not the defensive ones. I guess that'll have to be a hopeful maybe, but the offense with all of the personnel should be relatively seamless for a solution.
For sure, for sure. I think, yeah, they're going to be fine. Week 2 is a fluke. Week 2 is a fluke. You get punched in the mouth, throw it out. You're fine.
All right. 42-31. Josh Frey says Vikings over Lions. I got 24, or what did I say? 34-17 Vikings over Lions. And he is fried chicken on Twitter, FREYED_chicken. And he's there 24/7. He is the editor of Purple PTSD. Do you have any closing arguments before we log off?
Let's score some touchdowns this week, huh? Maybe breathe on a few receivers too.
Yeah. Maybe get within 3 or 4 yards. That would be okay.
Yeah.
All right, sir. We'll talk to you next Wednesday.
See ya.
All right, Skull, baby.